You know, just like thinking it's a piece of trash and that there's no reason to like it, and 2 isn't always better than 1. But this be a greater gift than a son. Twins don't always move the tons, but this be what the duck has won. Hello there, beautiful human. My name is RidersDX and welcome to Late Night Riders, the one talk show that takes place in a bedroom. Before we get started with our show, I just wanted to address a quick little controversy over here. I do understand that I've gotten some comments about the lack of social distancing within our audience, and so I want to let you all know that we've now instilled 6-inch social distancing between the audience members now, as you can see over here. We definitely value the importance of safety. But anyway, on today's show, we're going to be talking about the best Crash Bandicoot game of all time, and that is Crash Twinsanity. And this is a fact, not an opinion, so don't get it twisted. We've also got a special guest on board over here. I sat down with one of my closest friends, Dave Ace, to kind of just talk about Crash Twinsanity and how it's come to be and what its legacy is nowadays. And so look forward to his insight being inserted here and there into the show, you know, when I have nothing else to say. But before we dive into Crash Twinsanity, let's kind of dial back a bit in terms of Crash Bandicoot himself. And so Crash Bandicoot is obviously an extremely iconic franchise. He started out in the 90s with what felt like immediate sass and personality. I still remember watching those commercials, maybe not during the time when they aired, but certainly a little bit afterwards. I'm like, this Crash Bandicoot guy is ripped. As of 2007, the series had sold over 40 million copies, and we also know that the Insane trilogy had sold over 10 million copies worldwide and makes it the best-selling Crash Bandicoot game of all time. It really is no wonder why Crash 4 It's About Time is coming out in a matter of weeks. Crash Bandicoot is a household name and he's here to stay. In terms of Crash Twinsanity though, it came at a really interesting time in the franchise. It came after Wrath of Cortex, which was the game that came directly after the trilogy. It borrowed a lot of elements from the original trilogy games, but Crash Twinsanity really stood out from the very beginning of its inception all the way up to its eventual release. To kind of talk about how I got into Crash Twinsanity is actually really interesting because it's the same story as to how I got into the Crash Bandicoot franchise. And so I did own a PlayStation 1 when I was a kid, so obviously I never got the chance to play the original Crash Bandicoot games. No, my dad settled on buying me games like Bugs Bunny Lost in Time and Scooby-Doo Cyber Chase instead. My first experience with Crash Bandicoot was Twinsanity, and I can't really recall how I got the game. I just remember seeing it in the aisles constantly, and I thought, this looks kind of interesting. It looks cartoony and kiddish, definitely up my alley. So eventually I got my dad to buy it, and I just remember buying the Primer Guide like weeks later because of how much trouble I had with the game. And I was so fond of this game that I bought Crash of the Titans like the first week it came out. And I kind of fell off of Crash Bandicoot off of that because of reasons.
At long last, the world will have a way to recycle butter!
So for the longest time, I touted this game as both my favorite and the only Crash Bandicoot game I really was willing to play. But even after buying the Insane trilogy and playing through that entirely, I still find this to be my favorite Crash Bandicoot game of all time. And there's a lot of reasons for it beyond just nostalgia. Like, I promise you, it's not just nostalgia. If you want to learn about my reasoning for as to why the Insane trilogy is not my favorite set of games, you should consider subscribing because, when I went back to play this game for this video, I actually found it to be a lot more fun than I had beforehand, and so it's weird, but I actually turned out to like the game even more than I did before, and this video is just gonna explain why. Even the Duckles Overlord considers this one of his favorite games of all time. Never mind. Obviously with Crash 4 coming up, there's been a lot of discussion in terms of like what that game is going to consist of, what it should take from previous games, and I've just seen a lot of comments like really digging on this game, you know, just like thinking it's a piece of trash and that there's no reason to like it, and those kind of comments just made me want to draw my plushies to the wall. But I'm a peace lover. I bake pancakes and muffins in my dreams, so we're not going to do that. The game certainly shares a very mixed reputation. Easily the best post Naughty Dog Crash game until the Insane trilogy. Sadly could have used with an extra month or two of development, but still a good time. I don't think Twinsanity got nearly enough of the attention or care it deserved. In concept, it's probably one of the best Crash games out there. In terms of finished product, it saddens me to admit it's a super rushed hunk of junk. I really wish it got more time in the oven. A flawed but ultimately fantastic game. I just have so much fun with the game when it comes to the writing and gameplay. Wish it wasn't rushed and a little less glitchy, but still a very fun game to revisit from time to time. I think Crash Twinsanity is an amazing game despite how short and kind of rushed it was. I hope one day it gets a remake / remaster that brings all the original cut content and fixes some bugs and glitches. If anything, its soundtrack alone paired with the game's charming slapstick art style is the absolute defining feature of what makes this game stand out. You could have never played or even heard of this game, but still headbang to its music on the car ride home. I know this because it grew on my little brother while playing it sometimes when riding with him. Pretty soon he started jamming to it on his own. It's the greatest piece of garbage ever made in the series, a very fun and ambitious yet terrible and unpolished game. So Crash Twinsanity picks up directly after Wrath of Cortex, and so the whole premise of this game is that Cortex somehow gets unfrozen and he's hatching his next plan to just destroy Crash. There's no like take over the world thing going on over here actually, so it basically starts with Cortex doing some unsaid things to Coco, and so Cortex leads Crash into a trap where he's confronted by so many different enemies he's encountered in all of his previous games, and only Cortex and this robot fights him. So yeah, great evil plan, Cortex. Obviously Cortex fails, and then the two get into a ruffle and do some unspeakable things to each other. Oh, I love this game. But then eventually they get confronted by the evil twins, and these are birds that come from a different dimension, and they have an evil plan to take over their dimension. And so Cortex and Crash have to team up to take down these twins and ultimately save the multiverse. And that's basically the plot, you know, it really doesn't get much deeper than that. If you couldn't tell at this point, this game is really wacky. It's just got so many crazy expressions, so many dumb and stupid jokes. Twinsanity even taught me that it's okay to have a butt fetish and that it is a socially acceptable trait. I don't know, it's just something like, even as a kid, I found the humor of this game to be so weird, but I liked it. Like, it was funny, and watching it now, I kind of laugh because one, it's nostalgic, but two, because it's just so outright stupid sometimes and self-aware that it's actually pretty smart at times.
There's a bunch of adult jokes in it now that I go back and play it. Like, there's a bunch of adult jokes that I definitely wouldn't have gotten as a kid that I do now get, and I laugh at them like a lot more than I did as a kid because I understand. Like the scene where they're sledding down the mountain and he goes into the club and it's yes. Cortex's club. He's like, oh, I remember that. Are those real? Like, I was like, oh my god, how did they get away putting this in a kid's game?
Even though it's a Crash Bandicoot game, it has its own style and tone that's just so offbeat for the franchise, but it works. It really works in my opinion. There is one thing that really adds to the wackiness of this game, and that is the music. This is one of the most unique soundtracks, I think, of any video game because Crash Twinsanity's soundtrack is completely a cappella. So every single thing you hear in terms of music in this game comes from a human voice. And I think that's just the coolest thing ever. I love a cappella music. I think Twinsanity's just really weird nature really fits that kind of soundtrack. And man, it's such a jam. Let's get into the nitty-gritty details. How is the gameplay? And so Crash Twinsanity to me is like a really good balanced game. It takes a lot from what we saw before with the previous Crash games. The big difference with Twinsanity is its level design. The level design is now much more wide open. The game is kind of like a false open world is how I like to describe it. It is difficult to backtrack throughout this game. You basically go from area to area and going through certain sections to get to the next part. But the areas themselves seem a little bit more open, and exploration is definitely encouraged because of all the gems that are hidden everywhere. This is my favorite kind of game when I was a kid, and it's still my favorite kind of game now. You know, I grew up on games like Battlefield Bikini Bottom and the Alpha Bikini Bottom. And I love that like open world nature where like the game is still streamlined, but exploration within a certain levels are definitely encouraged. And so I definitely appreciated that. It got me really addicted to Crash Twinsanity just because it played well for me. I enjoyed like using Crash's moves. I think as a kid, I kind of wish that Crash was a little bit more diverse in terms of his move sets, because a lot of challenges in the game were really tough for me personally. But then, you know, me sitting here now as a 24-year-old man and struggling through basically the entire Insane trilogy, I kind of come to figure out that that's just what Crash is. Crash is supposed to make you rage like crazy. That's just what you signed up for, and that's a big reason as to why Crash is so big now. So it is what it is. The game definitely is challenging, but I would say compared to other Crash Bandicoot games, it's definitely a little bit on the easier side. When I recently played this game, it was after completing the Insane trilogy, and I realized just how much easier this game is in comparison, because you have a more open format. You're not as like tightly enclosed in the space, and thus you have a lot more room to kind of platform in the way you want. It's definitely not as frustrating as I thought it was as a kid, but I think for any first time player, you're still gonna get a decent challenge. So it might also be because of the fact that I played this game so many times that I know it pretty well. But I will say I still have not been able to 100% the game. Getting all the gems has been a really fun thing to try to do this time around, but man, some of those gems are pretty difficult, and you definitely need some dedication if you want to 100% this game. So Crash is the main character to play here, obviously, but there's also other multiple playstyles, which is what really gives this game the variety that I really like. I have talked about variety in games before in terms of how I think a little bit too much variety is not really a good thing, but I think Twinsanity hits a really nice balance actually, because all the different gameplay styles kind of fit together and they don't really intrude on each other. Like Crash is still the primary gameplay style that you're going to be doing here, but you do have parts where you're with Cortex and you get to do all these like team-based moves with Cortex. And you also have parts where you play as Cortex by himself or Nita Cortex by herself. And I will say all the characters play pretty well. Obviously Crash's gameplay is a highlight over here, but I do enjoy the levels where I get to play with Cortex and Crash at the same time. I think those levels are some of the smartest levels in this game, especially when you're at the school and you're kind of going through those sewers. I really liked a lot of the puzzles that they threw at you in that level. I thought a lot of that level design was really smart and engaging. I will say that Cortex himself was not really that much fun to play because they basically stripped a lot of platforming elements of Crash games out of him, which makes sense because it's Cortex. He's not really built for platforming, I guess. But basically all I did with him was just spam the hell out of his gun and just shoot everything in sight. And I don't know, I found that to be a little bit boring, but that's why the fact that there was only one Cortex level was really nice, because I didn't really want to play him again. The same goes for Nina Cortex, although I actually found her gameplay to be really fun. I really liked using the grappling hook, and that would have been a character that would have been nice to play a little bit more often, but I think that her level gives you a lot to play with, and I am glad that they focus more on the Crash gameplay overall. There's also some other things such as sliding, the monkey ball ripoff. Those were a little bit less significant, and they were perfectly fine. I really don't have that many complaints about them. But yeah, overall, I found this game to be really fun, and even playing it this time around and kind of noticing all the little glitches here and there that could happen, all the really weird movements that can happen, I still think the game is really playable and it's a blast to play. So if you like 3D platformers, then I think this game is a good one for you.
Yeah, no, I think it's just Twinsanity was a really ambitious take on Crash, because not only did they try to introduce it in a new way, but they also tried to give characters life, and that's something that I really appreciated. I love Crash, and I know he's known for his platforming and such, but there was never really any proper interaction in the trilogy compared to like Spyro, for example, because I didn't think that I'd like Spyro, but then like when I was playing through it, I noticed something that I liked a little bit more than what was happening in the trilogy for Crash, and I couldn't figure out what it was until I booted up Twinsanity one day, and I was like, oh my god, the characters don't have actual interactions with each other.
Yeah. Now, to kind of go into why there's a lot of negative feedback with this game, just to put it bluntly, this game was rushed. It was really, really ambitious. We've got so many different interviews, so much concept art and such about all the cut content that was cut from this game. And there's even self-referential jokes within the game that kind of tells us that this game is going to be a lot bigger than what it turned out to be. But of course, this was just a really tough time for Crash in general. The development teams that were making Crash games were definitely rushed and just kind of put it all over the place. Like the leadership during these times was just not great, and as a result the Crash Bandicoot games really suffered in terms of quality. But despite all that, I still found Twinsanity to be a really playable and fun and enjoyable experience. And I think my favorite thing about Twinsanity is that I just love the exploration. I loved all the environments. I loved being able to go to all these different places, and I loved the narrative that was tied along with that. It just felt like Twinsanity was its own little world, and I really felt immersed in it. I even like looking through like the box art and the manual and just kind of seeing like all the wacky stuff that's enclosed in it. It's got such a style to it that I really like, and no other Crash game has really come close to for me in terms of the same kind of personality. But yes, the game is buggy and the game isn't perfect, and it could have been so much more than what it turned out to be. But me personally, I think for what it's worth, the game is still really fun, and it definitely shows a direction I would love to see the Crash Bandicoot franchise go in the future. A lot of what has been brought up in the discussion of this game is whether or not it should be remastered or remade, and I sort of changed my opinion on this as time has gone on.
I would love to see Twinsanity get a remake or a port of some kind. I don't think a port would do it justice because there's so much content that was cut, so I definitely would love for it to be remade. But if I were in this position with how everything is lined up to go right now, Crash 4 coming up, I would say no. According to, and I mean, this is the big question that everybody keeps asking. Okay, Crash 4 is coming up. It's a direct sequel to Crash 3. It's canon to the classic trilogy. What happened to Wrath of Cortex? What happened to Twinsanity? The developers already said that both events happened. So what I would suggest doing is probably try and make something similar to Twinsanity in the future. Maybe not so soon after Crash 4, but definitely take the formula and everything that they had planned for Twinsanity and try and work it into a new game where you see Crash and Cortex forced to work together again. What that would eventually allow you to do is not only tie in the new Crash 4 plot into it for whatever happens in Crash 4, we could even improve some of the mechanics that got scrapped from Twinsanity and even implement in newer mechanics.
I was a really big proponent of this game getting a remake for a long time. I saw the Insane Trilogy, I'm like, man, Twinsanity could really use something like this, because a remake would be a chance for it to implement all the cut content that was supposed to be in the game. However, now that I think about it, and especially after seeing what Crash 4 has done, I actually think it'd be such a cool idea to give the developers free reign and actually just take some of the ideas that Twinsanity have and make their own game with it, because I think Crash Bandicoot has had enough remakes for a while. I really do think that it's time to build the franchise back up as to being a regular franchise, because you can only survive off of remakes for so long, and if you just milk the remake trend a little bit too much, I think it's gonna get stale really fast if it hasn't already. And I think there's just a lot more potential in seeing Twinsanity reborn in a brand new game with brand new ideas, brand new characters, a brand new storyline. Because I think if they tried to touch Twinsanity, a big part of me is still gonna love the original to death. It was a game I grew up on, you know, it's not negotiable, it's not logical at all, it's not objective, it's just my little lovely self just loving something that gave me so much joy as a kid. Let's embrace new ideas, let's embrace originality, because in an age where we're getting so many remasters and remakes, it's really hard to come by something nowadays that's both original and fantastic. And I have full confidence that Crash 4 is going to give us that exactly, and I want to see Activision continue this trend. I want to see more original, amazing games, and I think I only realized that when I saw Crash 4 and saw how amazing it is and how much potential it has. And so as long as it turns out good, you know, I really hope there's not like some wrench in the plan that makes the game turn out to be trash, but as long as it turns out to be good, I'm fully supportive of the team making a brand new game, taking some ideas from Crash Twinsanity and just doing something amazing. Now, I'm not adverse to like a Crash Twinsanity port though. I would love to play Twinsanity on like my Switch, for instance, because the only way I can play Twinsanity right now is on my 360, and unfortunately the 360 has some emulation problems that makes the game lag at certain points, and it's not the game that I played as a kid, unfortunately, because of these issues. And so I think having a port, you know, even if it's just to the PC, would be amazing to me, just amazing. So please, Activision, just give me a port. That's all I need. You know, you can even throw in Wrath of Cortex and Nitro Kart and maybe even Tag Team Racing if you want. Okay, maybe not Tag Team Racing. But that's pretty much all my thoughts about Crash Twinsanity. So let me know your thoughts on the game. Do y'all love it? Y'all hate it? Let me know why or why not. And let me know if you'd like to see this game remastered or remade or even just ported to new consoles, you know? Let me know, and I'd be really interested in reading your comments and just seeing what y'all have to say. But I do have one last message, and that is, I may not really need to see a remake of this game, but I will not rest until we see a reality TV show with Kardashian levels of drama that chronicles the most iconic wedding of our lifetime. Thank you so much for watching this video. Special shout out to the Nerd Corner, Killer Lemurs, Team Ride with Sign Gamer, Shara Rainfall, Johnny Hinton Ortiz, Trash Q, Abraham Muner, and Mass Muner. These are my patrons / YouTube members. If you'd like to become a patron or YouTube member, get access to a whole bunch of different perks, and please check out the links in the description box below. But alright, this is Riders, riding out.